What up, you guys? We're here for our secret teachings of Jesus. This is our Saturday night secret sermon where I give you guys some deep teachings from the Gnostic Gospels after midnight. I'm usually coming in after work when I make these videos, so it's always really late. But that's good because the sages have always studied late at night. There's this powerful energy that you can connect with in the midnight hour because it is the threshold between the end of one day and the beginning of the next. It's also beneficial to study Holy Scriptures late at night or pray late at night because we are more exposed to negative energies at night in the dark hours. So it actually adds this extra protection around us, and we increase our surrounding light. There is also an aspect too that studying in the late hours, especially around midnight, protects us from, so like when we take in light and wisdom and during like the holy holidays, when the windows of these gates of energy are open and we're receiving all of this energy from the light, we also have to integrate that and earn that light. And sometimes it causes us to have to go through a process. Like, for instance, have you ever bought like a personal development book or a self-help book or a spiritual book? And it's like the moment you crack the thing open and look at the table of contents, it's like related challenge, like shows up almost immediately. It's because we are having to embody and integrate that wisdom. Well, when we study late at night, the surrounding light that we glean from our studies is processed in a different way. So we don't have that extreme pressure that causes us to then have to like go through a process to earn that wisdom and embody it. So or we can, learn it more thoroughly and embody it without the chaos that is sometimes involved. So that is good. Also, I'm being told to let you guys know, if you happen to wake up in the middle of the night, you should pray because the spirit might be waking you up to pray for something. And during the night when everyone's asleep, your prayers are almost even more powerful. Think of like a radio signal so like think of the Wi-Fi. Have you ever been in a coffee shop or a restaurant and you're trying to use the Wi-Fi and you can't get your video to like, your video's buffering or you can't get something to download or upload because so many people are using the bandwidth? It's kind of same idea. When we're during the day, like we have these auras, right? And they're so big that they're touching up against everyone else's auras. And so there's all this negativity all day long with everybody around us. And so it's noisy, and the angels are the ones that intercept our prayers and take them to the upper realms in many cases. And so when we pray at night, most of the people are asleep. And so it gives you like a clearer signal or a faster upload, if that makes sense, using that analogy. But King David used to get up in the middle of the night and pray because he was not supposed to live past a certain age. So he would get up in the night and pray for his life to be extended and for God to protect his soul and to restore his soul to him every night. Because when we go to sleep, we have sort of like this miniature version of death and cleansing and judgment day that happens every day. And so a big portion of our soul leaves our body and goes to the upper realms, stands before the council for judgment, and that is a cleansing process for us. And so when we wake up, our soul is restored. And if we've slept really deeply, that's when we feel that sense of renewal. And so there's a waking prayer in the morning that is, how does it go? It's like, I'm so tired from work. I say this every morning when I wake up in Hebrew and in English, and now I can't think of it. Blessed are you, Creator of the universe, for for mercifully restoring my soul. I think. And blessed are you, Creator of the universe, for faithfully restoring my soul, or mercifully restoring my soul. I can't remember right now, but you guys get the idea. Okay, so I wasn't gonna make a video tonight because I was exhausted. And I know we had our Aries solar eclipse new moon like early in the wee hours of Saturday morning, which was like Friday night, Saturday morning. So I need to do that workshop, but I've had a really long week at work. I only had one day off, and I had to do a lot on that one day, and I had a migraine this week, and it's been busy at work, and so I'm pretty wiped out. And we have a buyout tomorrow at the restaurant, so that event is going to run late. So I actually decided to see if I can before work tomorrow, I'm going to do our workshop tomorrow. But the thing is, during an eclipse, you're really not supposed to ritual anyway. It's like all this chaotic energy, so you're kind of supposed to wait for the dust to settle. So that kind of helps us anyway. And even during a new moon, when the moon is fully dark, like you're really not supposed to ritual until the light starts to gather again. So no worries, because the new moon readings are really for the entire month, because the new moon is like the seed level of the whole month. So we will catch up with that. Don't you worry. But I wanted to make a quick video tonight doing a part 3 on the portion of the Gospel of Philip that we've been working on the last couple of weeks, because I kept feeling like there was something missing that I wanted to say. And it was revealed to me, of all things, when I was watching an episode of The Chosen last night. You guys know I'm obsessed with that show. And there's always a very poignant lesson that applies to that day in the episode that I watch. And in this case, it helped me remember what was missing from this lesson that we did on this portion. Okay, so bear with me, I'm tired. And I also have this blemish that is like at the level of Job's suffering. It is like so like tender, and I put this medicine on it that was just like too strong, and it burnt my skin. And so then it scabbed over, and I tried to like exfoliate it on my day off, but then it like came at like an even more intense like scab, and like I kept thinking that I was gonna smile at the restaurant tonight, and it was just gonna start bleeding. So I've been struggles bus. But okay, so here we are with my blemish and my scab face, and I'm tired and I'm insane. So basically, this is going to be a really quick episode. If you haven't watched the last couple of episodes of Secret Teachings of Jesus, we've been working on this portion of the Gospel of Philip entitled Creation Through a Mistake. And so I need to go back and edit the first original title as part 1, but you'll find them, they're all together in the Secret Teachings of Jesus playlist, because they've been continuous over the last couple of weeks. So there's the first one that's just Creation Through a Mistake. Then there's Creation Through a Mistake part 2. So those really unpack this portion in depth like we usually do. But I'm just making final notes this time, and it's going to be a more casual discussion than usual. We're not going to get chart out. We're not going to go into the depths of like the background. We're just going to read this, and I'm going to tell you the points that I forgot to give you already. So if you haven't seen those, then you probably want to just pause this and watch at least one of those episodes, because if you just watch this one, you're going to be like, well, you didn't say this. And I'm telling you right now. This is like the footnotes of those 2 episodes. All right. And plus my mouth feels like it's going to crack open. Okay. So creation through a mistake. I'm going to read this to you guys, and then I'll read it a couple of times, and then we'll go into what I'm talking about. Also, if you haven't had any context for the book, The Gospel of Philip, this isn't like the Gospels where you read it almost like a story or a play, and there's like dialogue, and there's like a continuous like kind of like scenario going on. these are actually just like these isolated portions of text that are cryptic and esoteric and meant to be meditated on. They're very symbolic, and there's a lot of symbolic references back to like the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament. And so it's kind of like an encoded kind of message in a lot of these. And so they can be very strange upon first hearing them. Okay, so creation through a mistake. The world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. For the world is not incorruptible, and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring. And whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. Now, we've already discussed in detail, like creation mythology around the Garden of Eden and the nature of what they mean when God made a mistake, and the mythology around the Hebrew letters, the alphabet, trying to convince God that human beings would only piss him off, and the angels that were also popping off and clapping back about it. So we've already gone into all that, and we already looked at the tree of life and discussed a lot of things there. What I want to get into tonight that I failed to talk about, I think, was the and we kind of got into the topical layers of what it means to be incorruptible versus corruptible. And I think that it is, what it's implying is that corruptibility is when you start as one being and then you are changed into another. So, like I said, we've already gone into depth about these concepts in the other two videos. So this is where I wanted to talk about. And this is what reminded me in The Chosen. So the incorruptible versus corruptible, and whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. I was reminded of what I wanted to talk about because so the episode of The Chosen that I was watching, and so if you don't know what The Chosen is a television series that I feel is like a masterpiece and very poignant during this time that we're living in, where the show is centered around like an intimate portrait of Jesus beginning his ministry and going out and spreading the gospel and gathering his disciples. And so you get to go into a deeper understanding of Jesus as a person, and also the disciples and their character and who they were as people. And it gives you a fuller, like multi-dimensional, fleshed out version of Jesus, rather than just like words on a page, or like there are projections of him, or sometimes we can just do this quick oh yeah, Jesus, I get it, but like we're not really thinking about who he was like as a human being, like divine but also human, and thinking about what kind of people his disciples were and who they were. And so it's really great. The show's really great. And they have like biblical experts and rabbinical experts weighing in, and they do a really good job. They do fill in some of the story just because, you've got to get from point A to point B. But all the important stuff is directly from the scriptures. And a lot of it is like quoted exactly from the Bible. And so the scene that I was watching last night in the episode was when Jesus met with Nicodemus. And Nicodemus was the head teacher of all of the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were sort of like the Jewish law cops. They were the high priests that maintained the law, and they sort of took the Bible or the Torah at the literal level and tried to like maintain the law and the mitzvah and the culture and the tradition of the people, and they enforced that. And so they would enforce the law of Moses. So you didn't want to get in trouble with the Pharisees, because that could have you excommunicated from the church or even executed by ritual stoning, but that didn't happen often. So Nicodemus was the teacher of teachers, and at the time, so there was these two schools of thought: the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Shammai, I think I'm getting his name right, was the more strict, dogmatic rabbi who took everything literally and was to the nines with it and showed very little mercy. He was like the far right, the very extreme conservative rabbi. Whereas Hillel was more of the liberal rabbi who would prioritize mercy and love towards people and kindness towards like laws that were would end up being like more of a hardship on people. Like for instance, like if something was to work against a widow that prevented her from remarrying because there wasn't anybody there that witnessed her husband's death, then she was considered an abandoned woman and not a widow. And so that prevented her from remarrying. And so like the Shammai would be like, no, you can't remarry because nobody witnessed your husband's death but you. But then like Hillel was like, you're only making it harder on the widow. We've suffered enough. So Hillel has the more merciful approach to the law, whereas Shammai has the more strict version of the law. So above all of these people was the high priest, but then the teacher of teachers, the person who was like the most erudite, studied expert, he was like one of the highest up Pharisees. His name was Nicodemus. And so he was actually like he believed in Jesus. Like when he started to hear in the beginning, like these miracles happening, and he went to talk to John the Baptist, and, you know, he was starting to put two and two together. He was like, oh my gosh, like Jesus really might be the Messiah. Whereas a lot of the other Pharisees were threatened by Jesus because he was going to shake up their tradition and the way of life that they knew and their jobs. And they were like, are our jobs at stake? Like, what about all the sacrifices? What about the temple? What about the things we do every day? They were sort of like the government, the Jewish government. And so they, a lot of the Pharisees weren't too hot on Jesus, but Nicodemus was. He really was curious and open and almost really wanted to follow Jesus, but he was old at this point. You know, he had a wife, he had grandkids, like he had a position of responsibility. And so he was invited to join, but he decided against it ultimately, much to his heartbreak and regret. So basically, Nicodemus goes to meet in secret with Jesus because he is like excited and curious and wants to sit down and talk with Jesus and interview him and ask him about all these things. And so he's trying to understand, like when Jesus is bringing them these teachings, they were so far out that like these guys, they'd always been so literal and like to the letter of the law, that, you know, you've met someone who's just like a total earth sign and they have no like mind for poetry or symbolism or like irony. You know, that's what Jesus was like dealing with these people. They could not understand his symbolism, his parables, like his ideas, you know, about opening the religion and kind of reforming it to include people that like Jesus really set out to expand the understanding of the Jewish people first, and then he thought maybe it would branch out into the Gentiles. But it was the Gentiles really that received his teachings early on with like open hearts and open faith. They were like, yeah, I can totally believe in miracles. Some of them didn't even have to see the signs. All they had to do was hear Jesus's message. And it was such a relief and such a salve and a fresh, it's like a breath of fresh air that they were like, yeah, we're in. Like, this is amazing. We love Jesus. And so they accepted him even before Jesus's own people in many cases, not every case, but in many cases. So Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is having a hard time understanding like this spiritual understanding, the spiritual wisdom. And so, Jesus is trying to say, like, you can't necessarily see the Spirit, but you can feel when the Spirit has been there, right? It's almost like you can't see the wind, but you can feel the wind. And so even though you can't see the Spirit moving and working in things, when the Spirit has been there. And there's a concept that the Kabbalah teaches, and it's called being face-to-face with God, facing the back of God, and then having your back to God's back. And what that means is when you're face-to-face with the Creator, it means that you are in the thick of it in your life. There's crazy things that you can't explain happening, crisis, maybe you're going through challenges and a hard time. But even in the midst of difficulty and uncertainty, you're like, I know God is working in my life. I know God is moving through the situation. I can feel God's presence, and I know that this is God moving through the situation. And you can trust that even though you don't understand why and what's going to happen and when and how and where, but you are feeling the presence of God in your life, and you trust that it's going to work out if you can hold on to your faith. So that is being face-to-face with the Creator. Facing the back of the Creator means that you understand when you look back on what happened. Oh, I can see how that helped me. I can see how that shaped me. I can see what God was doing now that I'm away from the situation and have been able to process. And now looking back in hindsight, I can understand and appreciate the value in that challenge, in that difficult season of my life. It's like having someone come into the house, like having God come into your house and recognizing that he's there right away. Whereas someone that has their back to the Creator, it's like you figure out that he was there just a little too late as he was leaving, right? Now, a person with their back to the Creator's back, this person is in total despair, and they have lost hope and they've lost faith, and they cannot see any good in their situation. They can't see how it can turn into anything that could be positive for them later. They are in the midst of the turmoil, and that's all they can see is darkness. And so they have no hope, and they have absolute despair, and they feel absolutely abandoned. They are incapable of seeing God or anything miraculous or the possibility of anything miraculous at all. And so that is having one's back to the Creator. So he's trying to explain to him about, like, you can feel the Spirit, like you can feel wind, but you don't necessarily see it, but you can feel the presence, and you can see things that are moving in your life and changing. And then he goes on to say, and then Nicodemus is like, yeah, I think I can understand. And so then Jesus is like, look, what is born of flesh is flesh, and what is born of spirit is spirit. And what we have to do is take our flesh and be reborn in spirit in order to connect with these concepts, to truly connect with the Holy Spirit, to have that supernatural connection, that anointing. It comes from being reborn in the Spirit. Like, a person has to totally change their consciousness. And so Nicodemus says, and this is in the Bible, the high priests are like, do you mean you have to go back into your mother and be reborn again? And Nicodemus is like, because my mom's dead, that's going to be a problem. And Jesus literally said to the high priests, like, are you honestly this thick? Like, aren't you supposed to be the high priests that are teaching people, and you don't understand this concept? Like, you literally think that I mean that you need to be born physically again? No. It's a renewing of our mind, a renewing of consciousness. Okay, so in this passage, so the world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal, but he failed and did not get what he hoped for. The world is not incorruptible, and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Things that are born, right? Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring, unless it is born. So nothing can be incorruptible unless it is something that is born of something else, like say reborn, born again. And whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. So our flesh, so let's pretend that our understanding of corruptibility is when a creature changes in a profound way from one form to another. Our flesh, like Adam and Eve, were created and they were non-physical immortal beings, but then when they fell, they came to earth, where the earth was suddenly physicalized. The Garden of Eden was not in a physical state. It was a light, like they were light beings. Like it was like being in a dream in the astral realm. It was non-material, non-physical, but it was immortal. So there was no shelf life, there was no decay, there was no death or sickness or suffering. But when they fell and they were separated from God through their ego and shame, they were given clothing of skin, which was the flesh. And so they were created, but then they changed into these other beings, these mortal beings. But their children were unchanged. They were born flesh human beings and mortal human beings. So Adam and Eve were created, they were immortal, they were light beings who then changed and corrupted and became mortal flesh. But their children, their offspring, were always born human beings made of flesh. God, even though in a sense God is unchanging, in the beginning God was one, but had to pull himself apart so that there was other to share with, so that there was vessel to pour light into, to create the world in. So it's like God was whole, but then he split a divine masculine, which was our supernal father, and then a supernal mother, the divine feminine. And so in that way, it says God is God was corruptible. Somewhere it says that. Oh, the creator of the world is not incorruptible. So even the creator of the world was changed in some fashion in order to be able to make way for the world, to create the world. So the thing is, though, so when you look at us as human beings, we are offspring. So we're physical beings, and then we have a soul, which the soul is changeable. It's corruptible. The soul has flaws, it has strengths, it has layers. It has layers of negativity that have built up over lifetimes, and then we also heal and correct that soul. So the soul is in flux and the soul is changing. Our mind changes, our heart changes, our emotions change. We are very changeable beings. We age, we get sick, we die. But what is incorruptible, what never changes, is our spirit. That is the deepest part of us that is always pure. It is never tarnished. It is always in perfect perfection, perfect wholeness, in the image of God. And so that light, that spirit part of us, is that piece of God that is broken off and is always in a perfect state. And it's that version of us, we call it the higher self many times. But our spirit self is already completely whole and perfected and is an example of our utmost potential. And it never, ever changes. Our soul changes, our hearts change, our minds change, our consciousness changes, but our spirit does not. And so our spirit has full comprehension and understanding of the mysteries of the universe, right? And so it says, whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. Well, like Jesus was trying to explain to Nicodemus, in order to truly understand these concepts on a soul level, you have to be reborn in spirit. And so you have to let go of your old consciousness that clings to a literal intellectual understanding and needing everything to make sense and fit into a box. But if you can let go of that and be reborn into your spirit doesn't need the Newtonian physics, right? But look at Newtonian physics versus quantum physics. Newtonian physics is gravity, right? It's size and volume and velocity and all of those things that are like predictably calculable, because the things that are in like the normal size, like they are fairly predictable. And so this is like math, this is basic science, this is basic chemistry. But then when you get into quantum physics and you get into things that are infinitesimally small and then gargantuanly big, like the math doesn't add up anymore. It's not the same. None of the same rules apply. And so that was very startling for the first quantum physicists, because they were like, okay, what is happening? I'm a mathematical genius. None of this math is adding up. This is spooky. Like everything's like once you think you have a hold of something, it slips out of your hands. Like trying to understand quantum physics is likened to someone who's totally literal trying to understand the spirit realm. It doesn't have to make sense. And the spirit realm communicates through symbolism and things that don't quite make sense. What I was going to say earlier when I was talking about the myth of creation, I mean myth as in the way that Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung mean it, whereas myth is not fiction. It's just a truth that's so great that there's like the cosmos tell it again and again and again and again in all these different ways. So the spirit is incorruptible. The spirit is unchanging, and the spirit has a different level of intellect and understanding that goes beyond reason, and beyond understanding, beyond the human understanding. And so in order for us to let these concepts and this higher truth come alive in us, we have to let go of our materialism and our Newtonian thinking, right? And let our spirit be playful and have radical acceptance about certain things, you know. And what I love is like studying about quantum physics. It is, to me, instantly, I could relate that to spirituality and mysticism. It was like, oh, this is the bridge here, right here. And the book, Dancing Woolly Masters, is in that vein, by Gary Cusack something. Cusack maybe. I used to have the book, but it belonged to like an old boyfriend. And so when the relationship was over, he took the book. The greatest part of the loss. So I've always had to reorder it. I still need to, but I have a stack of books, like, I don't know, a mile high that I need to read. It was a pretty thick one, but when you start reading about quantum physics experiments and the particle slit experiment and the fact that like when we observe like energy, it changes, and energy is like conscious and it knows when it's being observed and it acts different when it's being observed. Even when it's just a machine measuring it, it like acts different than when it's not being observed. It's crazy. So even just thinking about being able to radically accept those truths is a stretch for many people who are very literal and very intellectually oriented. You know, they don't have, the spirit is not awakened in them, or they're not awakened to their spirit, rather. So in order to be able to give wisdom and understand it, you have to be able to receive it also. So, because you cannot give what you cannot receive. And it's funny too, because like I've known people who have been so into like Bible study and understanding like theology and Carl Jung and all this stuff, but they're so intellectual. They have no faith. They don't believe in miracles. They don't believe in the magic of the universe. They're just so like, I don't know, a bag of rocks and dust, I guess. The light is dim in them. I mean, they have the light, but the veil is very thick with those people. And so they have a really hard time. They almost believe that like, oh yes, I believe Jesus was like a historical figure, but they have a hard time actually believing in the miracle part of it and the fact that he's the Messiah and that he was born of a virgin. They're like, well, I can believe he was a good guy. It's like, yeah, you're missing out on a lot. So I think that's where we're at tonight. So what is born of flesh is flesh. So what we understand only on a flesh materialism level, that's as far as we're going to get with it. What is born of flesh is flesh, and it doesn't have everlasting life. It will fade, it will corrupt. It doesn't give you that oomph that you need when you're going through hardship. It doesn't give you that faith, that certainty in something beyond you. You're left with just, oh, well, I hope it works out kind of thing. But what is born of spirit is spirit. And when you can open yourself up to believing in those miracles and believing in that which you cannot understand and accepting that radically in faith, and that opens up a world of miracles for you. And then you start living a life that is very miraculous and magical for sure. But you have to believe before you see. All right, you guys, let's read this one more time and then we're out. The world came into being through a mistake. The Creator wanted to make it incorruptible and immortal. I don't know where that came from. But he failed. And he did not get what he hoped for. For the world is not incorruptible, and the Creator of the world is not incorruptible. Things are not incorruptible, but offspring are. Nothing can receive incorruptibility unless it is an offspring. And whatever cannot receive certainly cannot give. Same. People who are just intellectually reading this doctrine, they don't have the anointing to preach that wisdom. They don't have wisdom to give. They don't have true, deep understanding because they haven't really received it yet. So they're not really open. They haven't prepared the vessel to be open to receiving that wisdom and that insight and that deeper understanding beyond the Shemai. They're not Hallels, they're Shemais. All right, you guys, that is all for tonight. I will hopefully see you tomorrow for our solar eclipse workshop. I know that I will be working very late tomorrow night, so I may or may not have the energy to do our weekly energy oracle forecast. So we'll see how that plays out. Maybe we'll get caught up on Monday, but I will do my best. All right. Ciao.